Good evening. We will now call to order the February 18th School Board Work Session meeting. Would everyone please rise for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda is announcements and executive session report. The public is hereby advised of the audio and video recording of this meeting and that it may be rebroadcast. Also, I'd like to announce that there was an executive session that was held following the January 28th, 2014 meeting, and that was held to discuss contract negotiations with MESPA and the Teamsters. By way of attendance, all board members are present except for Mrs. Shackelford, who is traveling to visit family. So next item will be public comment on board action items. Any public comment on board action items? Mr. Andrews?
John Andrews, Lower Providence. Good evening. I guess we all made it through another week of snow. There are several items on tonight's agenda that you're voting on that I wanted to comment upon. Some weeks ago, I was looking at the district's calendar for the school year, and I noticed a strange thing. Throughout the calendar, the word holidays is utilized. Never once do we hear the name, do we read in the calendar the name of any holiday. We have holidays like Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, President's Day, all of them probably enacted by federal law. And I can't think of any other calendar that I've ever seen that airbrushes out the names of holidays. And I don't think that teaches the children the right lesson. So I think there's room in the calendar to put in all of those words, and I think it's constructive. And it's non-financial. We're several months into the budget season, and I've yet to hear of any serious cuts. I'd like to know, are there any ideas that are in progress to cut costs? I'm not saying you change the amount in the preliminary budget, but I'm not saying directors should raise their hand for different percentage numbers. I'm asking, are there any areas where you think it's possible that cuts will develop? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Any other board comment on, public comment on board action? Okay. Moving on to board action items. Several items on here. I'll turn this over to Dr. Zerbe to review the items.
If we turn attention to item 6.1, the revised calendar for 2013-2014, we're asking for the board to retroactively approve the revised calendar. Now, this day, the February 4th, the February 14th.
Yeah, it's you. Go ahead.
The 2013-14 calendar.
In any respects, I'm thinking everybody can hear me.
Or do you need this for the recording?
Okay.
All right. Well, what we're asking the board to do is to grant us retroactively to use a day that was originally on the calendar as approved last year for this year, which was an Act 80 day, to move that Act 80 day to the end of the school year, therefore allowing us to recoup 1 day as a result of the 7 snow days that we've currently encumbered this school year. So basically, I want the board and the public also to know that we're working not only administratively, but also with the associations within the school district to identify other ways to help lessen the pain for families and students with regards to summer vacations, as well as our testing windows and other academic rationale to help facilitate some changes in the schedule. And I hope to be able to provide some recommendations at a future meeting. But this is really only to affect the 1 day of change. The next item, are there any questions on 6.1 or anything related to that change?
Yes, can I just ask if there's any possibility of keeping graduation in that week? I know that we need to move it from the 10th, but is there a way to keep it with by that Friday or through that weekend, potentially?
I'm glad you asked that question. That's one of the things that we're focusing on, is trying to make sure that, if at all possible, either by Friday, or which would be the 13th of June, or sometime that weekend, to be able to focus on trying to get graduation fit in. So that's part of the plan at this point. And certainly, there's only so many days that we can try to recoup. But those are discussions that we're having, and I'm hoping to be able to get as close to the 13th as I possibly can. One of the things that we'll have to consider, and this is certainly an option, at some point we can decide as a board to forego some of the subsidy that we would typically gain if our seniors would attend for the full 180 days. And depending on how the calendar shapes out, that might be a small amount of money, but it also could be a significant amount of money. And so I need to continue working through that process to give you an accurate representation of what our options are as a school district. So Stuart and I have been working on that, along with Bob and the Methacton Education Association leadership, to try to organize some options to provide to the board. So we hope to be able to do that soon, but keeping in mind one of those items being to make graduation at a reasonable time.
Good question. Yeah, this question came from somebody, a member of the school district parent. When we have delays, they're always 2 hours. Is there any reason why we don't have 1 hour delays?
There are school districts that do have 1 hour delays, and actually I think there's some districts that have a 3 hour delay program. I can tell you that I'm not familiar that we as Methacton School District have traditionally used anything other than a 2 hour delay. And I hate to defer this to Bob, but I know you have history related to this. Do you have any comment on that, Bob?
Many years ago, it would be between a 1 and 2 hour delay. We haven't done a 1 hour delay in over 10 years, I would say. So historically, it's really up to the superintendent to make that call when he does.
I think during this season, we've not been I don't believe we've been in a position to make any other call than a 2 hour delay. In fact, today was probably right on the bubble of being a 2 hour delay and possibly a cancellation. And it just so happened that the snow stopped in time for us to clear everything off that we wanted to have cleared off. But we certainly can look at putting a 1 hour delay process in place. However, I think typically if we're getting 2 to 3 inches of snow where we would have a delay, it gives us enough time for our crew to get out, plow the driveways and shovel the pavements in order to make sure that we have a safe environment. Plus, in addition to that, I believe that historically there's been some concern about the differences between townships and how they might plow at different times throughout a storm. So we can't really always tell that, Lower Providence will have everything cleaned up and ready for travel at the same time that Worcester might. So, those are some things that we have to contemplate. And I generally reach out to either the township manager or to our chief of police to have those conversations early in the morning.
Thank you.
Has your communication with the township managers, has that been successful when you've called them, or have you had any problems where you couldn't get a hold of any of the township managers?
No, I've had as part of my entry plan into the district, one of the first things was to meet with both the Lower Providence Township Manager and the Worcester Township Manager. And when I made the call, if I didn't get them right at the first call, they've called me back, within a reasonable period of time. So we've had good communications. They've advised me based on their status, especially during the most recent power outages. They were the conduit of information related to when we thought we were going to get power on to some of our residents. So they were able to keep us abreast of, the percentage of people without power. And they had that, they provided me that information, allowed me to gauge whether or not we should have school or not. So they were very helpful.
Do you have any contingency plans in case we need any additional days?
What we're working on right now is to try to ascertain a status where we're looking at all the available days within the calendar. We're also contemplating the Saturday rehearsals that are eligible under the graduation requirements and can be counted for seniors as part of their graduation. We're also considering putting those, not the Saturdays, but the available days in the calendar and prioritizing them so that we can agree to say, the next snow day, we use this particular date, then the following snow day, we use this particular date, so that it's scheduled throughout the remainder of the school year, so there's no question. If you look at the calendar, there's only so many days we can use. And some of them are designated contractually that may not allow us to just arbitrarily just make that decision unilaterally. Any other?
Yeah, I just want, given all of the issues that we have had this year and potentially could have next year, is there a chance we can get some snow days built into our calendar so that we don't have to scramble at the end?
I can tell you that I've had a couple emails from parents making that same type of request, and as you know, we built in approximately 5 snow days into the calendar, 2 being a part of the spring holiday, which we currently are going to be used, or that are currently going to be used, and then we also built in, I believe, 3 at the end of the school year. But I imagine what you're proposing is having days built in during the months of operation rather than tagging on at the end. So that if we find ourselves in a position like we are this year, we're in a better position to keep graduation and the end of the school year consistent for our families. And we certainly can do that. That's why typically we would have come to you with recommendations for next year's calendar, usually at the end of January and possibly even this month. But I've reserved holding that off until we resolve our current calendar woes. That way I can give you a better idea of what can come for next year.
What are we going to do about, I know there's some classes that start the following week when school ends. There's some summer classes where kids can take, health or whatever it might be. What are we going to do about that if we're still in school?
We're going to need to talk with the program operators for those particular classes and need to make adjustments. Certainly we have facility usage that occurs immediately following school as well. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at, but primarily our focus is really on the last day of school for our students and graduation. I think by keeping those things, an eye on both of those items and getting them as soon as we possibly can within the calendar will then allow us to better make those other contingencies decisions about facility usage or other programs that are operated, because we certainly don't want to put a priority on those programs against our graduation. So, we're making graduation and the end of the school year for students our priority in the decision-making process, and what's best for our families, and certainly testing. We need to keep that in mind. As we're losing days, we're also losing instructional days that are important for us prior to the PSSA and Keystone exam windows. So that's, just another avenue that we need to keep into consideration. So we have things like professional development days and so forth, maybe other holidays are listed in there. Those are all on the table at this point.
Can I ask a question? When the state declares an emergency like they did during the ice, I know my daughter's school that Wednesday, they don't have to make it up because they applied for the exception. Is the faculty going to do that? I know, because they said when the governor declares a disaster declaration or state of emergency, if the schools have the opportunity to apply for, that they don't have to make up that day. Are you planning on doing that, or is that a thought? I know you still have to make up that time you're losing it at some point.
Well, there's some misconceptions out there about that process, and with talking just recently with a group of Montgomery County superintendents and having the Montgomery County IU Executive Director, Jerry Shively, speak directly to the Deputy Secretary of Education, Carolyn Dumares. He basically said that the only piece that the state of emergency provides us as schools in forgiving us of the 180-day requirement is that the legislature can now make a recommendation to the governor to forgive those days, and if they do that, then we could if it's an application process, we'll certainly based on the recommendation of the board, we can certainly do that. But before that ever occurs, it's likely that the winter months will have come and gone, and we'll be in March or late April with some days to still make up, and we may not know whether the legislature will move forward with that type of recommendation. So it's not something you can just do. Under the regulations, it does allow for this, and this is one thing that I will make a recommendation to the board at the appropriate time, will be to forego the attendance for the 3 schools that were off during the period of the power outage. So the regulation does say that in the event of an emergency where not all your schools can operate, you can get, and the Secretary of Ed can authorize this, is to allow for, say for example, Worcester, Skyview, and Arcola not to be required to make the 180 days. So they would typically then, we would ask for forgiveness of 1 day or for them to be required to make 179 days without loss of subsidy. So that's what I plan to do, but I'd want to make that recommendation at a time when I know we're probably through this process.
Any other questions? Okay. Hearing none, then I'll ask for a motion to approve retroactively the revised calendar for the 2013-14 school year, reflecting February 18, 2014 and June 18, 2014 as student days, and June 19, 2014 as an Act 80 day. Mr. Roth, second. Mr. O'Neill, discussion?
This doesn't, we're not declaring a graduation date though, right?
No, this is
Okay.
just, no. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? 8-0. Thank you. Dr. Zerbe, you want to talk about settlement agreements and release?
Listed under item 6.2, settlement agreements, I'm asking that the board approve the settlement agreements as listed for the students listed. These are settlement agreements with special language and terms for that are drafted and approved by the district solicitor.
Can I have a motion to approve as recommended the 3 settlement agreements and releases between Methacton School District and student 170331, 160029, and 171566? Ms. Petraskis, is there a second? Brenda, Ms. Haskett. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? 8-0. Okay.
The next item is 6.3, preliminary general fund budget for 2014-2015. We're asking for the board to approve the adoption of the preliminary general fund budget of the Methacton School District for the 2014-15 fiscal year in the amount of $99,852,325 with a proposed millage of 28.56. That's an increase of 4.52%. Before there's any action taken on this, I just wanted the board to remember that this was our, again, a preliminary budget. I want the public to remember this is a preliminary budget as well. We, as stated in our January 28th meeting, we are taking several steps in order to address our expenditures and revenue accordingly. We are doing building budgets to make sure that we communicate our processes and our status at this time for all of our stakeholders within the school district. We're putting together budget booklets that we've distributed to many, or if not all the board members now. Okay, those budget booklets. So I just ask that when we come to the official meetings, that we bring those booklets with you, so that we can provide additional resources, so that any time through the budgeting process, you'll be able to refer to any of the items that we've discussed. And certainly, we'll have additional handouts. Some of them will be working documents. Some of them will be documents that we provide directly to the public. In addition to that, we are working on looking at having meetings with our building principals and staff of departments in order to analyze expenditures and come back to the Finance Committee with budgetary reduction recommendations. We then believe that those recommendations will come to the board as a whole. And lastly, we are looking at the enrollment versus capacity in the buildings. Just make sure that we're looking at not only the utilization of staff and buildings, but looking at, again, all the programs and services that we provide, and making sure that those programs and services are being efficiently and effectively used and implemented.
So this is the same budget that we discussed in the January 28th meeting. The presentation is in the binder in front of each board member. Before I ask for a motion, any questions for Stuart or David? Okay. Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve the adoption of the preliminary general fund budget for the 2014-15 fiscal year in the amount of $99.85 million with a proposed millage of 28.56, an increase of 4.52%. Mr. Petraskis, is there a second? Brenda, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Opposed? Passes 6-2. Okay, thank you.
The next item on the agenda is we're recommending to approve a contract based on the recommendation of the Property Committee and the amount based on the proposals provided and those awarded for the construction management services of the Methacton High School athletic field complex, pending contract review by the solicitor.
So this is the project manager that we said that we wanted for the Fields project. And so, Dr. Zerbe, maybe you can take us through the process, who responded to the RFP, and who was involved in the scoring process, and then your thoughts on each one and where the scoring came and what the recommendations are.
Okay. The process was this. We put together a request for a proposal. We provided a request for a proposal to 4 known firms. Those firms responded. We had 3 responses. And the 4th response was from a firm that chose not to respond. They basically responded saying that we will not respond. We don't have staff available to address the project. From the 3 responses, we evaluated those responses. We then took those evaluations to the property committee. We basically stated at the property committee meeting that each of the 3 vendors that made a proposal had some missing information that we felt was critical for us to at least consider as part of the construction management process, and therefore we chose to call each of the 3 vendors in and hold interviews. We had I believe, a 5-man interview team, included our business manager, our assistant to the superintendent, myself, Bill Jacoby, director of Facilities. Sorry, Bill. And Property Committee Chairman, Mr. Phillips. We interviewed all 3 vendors, and we then created we had a grid that basically outlined our review. We provided that review to the committee, and you turn over to the committee at this time to make their recommendation.
Mr. Phillips, do you have any?
The committee hasn't been together to discuss the 3 alternatives, and I'd like to take the opportunity here with the board and have a discussion about it, and the board can then have a vote on it. So we had 3 different companies, Whiting Turner, Zobspector, and Fidelia. Well, I'll start with Whiting Turner. They were the highest bid at $125,000. They are from Allentown. Their one flaw that they had was the insurance requirements, and it was the professional liability insurance, which all the candidates had except for them. We asked if they would get it. They said they wouldn't change anything, and it basically took them right out of the mix. Also, I asked all 3 candidates that if our light project isn't timed within the September end date, in other words, if the township doesn't give us the conditional use approval and we have to put up the lights at a later date than between now and September, if they would come back and monitor the installment of the lights. Whiting Turner, they specified that based on their contract, or the proposal they gave us, the end date was September, and the feeling was that it would be an upcharge for coming back out. Zobspector, they didn't have a problem coming back out for another week or 2 to make sure the installation was done. Fidelia, they responded that their proposal was based on a start date and end date, and they weren't really up to speed on what our situation was with the township, and they weren't familiar with that, and their bid did not include coming back. So they were those 3. So narrowed down to Zobspector and Fidelia. At looking at this, at first glance, their pricing, Fidelia was $105,000, Zobspector was at $107,000, very similar in pricing. I wouldn't say give either one an edge on that. They were both in the same ballpark. As far as the experience, one firm, Fidelia, has Richard Rohr as their construction manager, and he would be able to be there on the job. He said he would be in the trailer, if I remember correctly, and we asked how long they would be in the trailer or on the actual site. And it was between 50/50 and 60/40 being outside, monitoring the job, because you do have paperwork to do in this whole process. His experience as with fields, he's done regular grass fields. He hasn't done any turf fields, synthetic turf, to be clear. Also, professional construction manager, he's been one since 2011 to current, for the last, we'll say, 3 years. Zop Spector has Kenneth Worthington. He's been 55 years as a construction manager, project manager. He's been involved with design build, construction scheduling, estimating, payments, forced accounts. That gets into the state stuff. Understand the security requirements for schools, prisons. Zop Spector has also done the Montgomery County prison system. They did a project in our county where they did the design and build for the prison. He also does building and code inspections, certified payroll. One of the things that all the companies did have was the Primavera project management scheduling software, which will allow you to see where the job's at. And that's important both on making sure the schedule's on time and that they have goals and they're met. But also, with the Primavera, we'll be able to see what task is upcoming, what's completed, what's not completed, what's behind. We'll be able to see that as it happens. So you have to understand this job is not just the turf fields. This is a stormwater management job. This is a building construction job. This is electrician, storage, stormwater management, and then the turf fields. The turf fields take up maybe 10% of the whole job. With that being said, the company that's going to come out and put the fields in, they're the true experts on putting the field in. They're the ones that are going to make sure that the final base course is done right, the sand course, the actual synthetic turf, the material that goes in the turf. They're the ones that are really going to be on site to make sure that happens, because they have to stand by their warranties, etc. Where my concern is making sure that we have people in place that know the stormwater management systems, that can talk to the county DEP and also their conservation districts, and that can, if we have a problem with whether it's basin or the erosion control, that we have that relationship. So through looking through all this, and also location, Fidelia is a Lancaster company. Zop Spector is a Montgomery County. They're about 10 minutes down the road. So where I'm at is who knows the job the best from the design standpoint. Also, who's going to be on site with the most experience. And where I'm at personally is Zop Spector, based on everything that I've said. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Did you say the individual had 55 years experience or no? No, the individual. Here's the resume again.
Aren't they already working on this as the, isn't this quite a bit of conflict of interest if we're going to have them supervising the people who are actually in charge of doing the project?
I think there is. I got all this information at about 4 o'clock today, and I got the scoring, I got the
the resumes, and then I also went online and checked out both companies. And what Jim is saying, I tend to agree with him in some points, that we are going to need somebody there that knows about the water management and what's been done. But Spector is going to be here anyway. They're going to be here as our engineer, and it will be our engineer answering those questions, not the contract management. Fadivia is out of Lidditz, and they have many, many projects under their belt. This individual that is going to be on site, the Richard Rohrer, has not. But when you go on their website, you find many turf projects that they've completed. And they mention a man, Dan Sakala, who apparently is the president and the founder. And I think one question that we may need to have is, and I asked Jim earlier, well, why can't this Dan be our project manager? And apparently he's got other things to do, and he's on other contracts. But I'm sure that he'll be available for some consulting, but I think that's probably a question that we need to ask. And he has many, many years of experience. And again, they have turf management, contract management of athletic fields at Fleetwood. They did the Fleetwood Stadium Complex. They did the Warwick Stadium and Turf Complex. They did Manheim Township. I read all the notes that you guys put on your scoring things, and there were other, and the things that were on the website, this is what the gentleman told you because I see those in your notes. Price-wise, it's $2,000 difference. I don't see any difference in that. When you went on the Spector website, they had not one project listed that had anything to do with anything other than roads, actually. Now, Jim had indicated to me that they did a local...
Yeah, they did your Sinus College. They're a resident engineer for the last 32 years. They did the turf field project there from conception to the finished product. So they did the design work, the project management work, all the way to the end.
The gentleman also on his resume indicated that they did Pennington High School artificial athletic field. I had a problem with this is Mr. Worthington, he's from Spector. I had a problem with his resume because he goes back to 1977 of his previous employment summary, and then it just stops in 1998. Now, perhaps he went to work for ZOP in 1998, I don't know, but I think that question should probably be asked. The other thing that kind of concerns me is that we haven't done any calling on references, but unfortunately, Jim, if I had to make a recommendation, I would recommend Fadivia.
Is this information somewhere? Do we have this? I don't think I've seen it. Hasn't
The property committee does.
So just the property committee has this as of now?
I got it at 4 o'clock today. When we first talked about the subject of a project manager, it was when we were having concern about the time and when the project could be done. And what kind of provisions are there in the contract for making sure that the project gets done on time with regard to either one of them? And are there any financial penalties if they don't achieve those goals?
I'm going to turn that question over to Stuart because he worked with us, not on the project management, because we don't have the contract in place, and that's why the recommendation says with the approval of the solicitor. But some of the things that we would typically do and what we would have in the agreements for the general contractor, Stuart, if you could just add.
Yeah, and speaking with the architect when we were reviewing just prior to going out to bid, it was the collective recommendation that we do put in penalties for contractors that do not reach certain benchmarks relative to the timeline. Obviously, being a short duration project, it's always good to have that hammer, so to speak, that basically shows the contractor that you're very serious about your timeline, and if they don't meet that timeline, barring unforeseen circumstances that they would not be able to control, otherwise weather immediately pops in my head, there are financial implications that would be incurred by the contractor if they do not reach the completion of the project by the stated deadline, which is September.
And so those same contingencies, we agreed upon, at least administratively, to put some of that same type of language in there for the construction management firm as well. Because we think that there's certainly a level of dependability and reliability on their ability to act and to inform us and to be our advocate as part of this process in order to make sure this project gets done on time.
I have another question. We haven't yet talked about the complete project and what it is. What is it that we have asked them to manage? Is it the whole project as was defined by David Horn, or should we wait until we've actually decided what the project is?
Well, we've gone through the, great lengths to define what that project is, and certainly I think on 2, possibly 3 occasions, we've made recommendations to the board that although there is a base bid and several alternate bids and some even deduct bids that were involved there, our recommendation is to move forward with all the items as I listed in my previous presentations, and that the only major consideration that I think the board would consider would be the addition of the second bathroom, which is something that I think is important to have. However, it is certainly something we can manage to operate the types of facilities we want and still meet the requirements for the restroom requirements for the fields. So we've asked the contract management firms to be available April 1 through the end of September to manage the scope of the entire project based on my recommendations.
But we haven't yet done that. We had some conversation at our last meeting that we would be talking about what the scope of the project is once bids came in from people who want to do the actual project. So will there be any differences in charges if things were different than the total project that was discussed? I mean, one of the issues that Jim raised was the possibility of the lights not being part of the initial phase of the project, and that conceivably there would be additional costs. But I'm not sure that we are yet of a mind exactly what the total project consists of.
Well, I think you're right to the extent that the board has not adopted or approved any bids. So once the bids are approved, that would pretty much identify the scope of the entire project. So yes, I think with any approval this evening, we would have to write in their language, and I would get assistance from our solicitor to make sure that, I mean, it would be contingent on certain approvals from the board. So the timeline could shift, meaning the amount of time that the construction management firm would need to be on site, and certainly that could then sequentially change the amount of dollars needed for that construction management firm. But in the overall aspect of this recommendation this evening is to get to the point where we're asking for, we know what the full amount of the scope of the project could be based on everything that I recommended, which is everything other than the bathroom, which means it's everything that's in the proposals that Dave Horn had brought forth before the board, Proposal K. And that would then allow us to complete everything in there if the board so chooses to adopt and approve all the bids that come in.
So there's no contract yet, and the quotes that have come in, the response to the RFP is based on the scope of doing the entire project. So the contract would have to be written in such a way that if the board is to go then approve something different from the scope of the entire project, that the fees would be adjusted thereabouts.
Right, so sequentially, it certainly may seem out of sequence, but we have, the bids are due on the 19th. We have a administrative bid review meeting scheduled for the 21st. That was the earliest our architect, David Horn, would be available. The idea there is to have a meeting so that we can review the bids in advance of the February 25th meeting in order to provide the board an indication of where we stand generally with the financing limits on these proposals. So for example, we would want to make sure that if on the 25th, we know that, say the bids come in and it's over the amount that we're going to ask for your approval on the 25th for the bond of $5.5 million, we can make you aware of that prior to that event occurring and then make different decisions based on that particular information. Meaning, if we come to you and say we get bids back of $10 million, that's as a far-fetched example, certainly we might want to then have a different discussion about that bond and the project overall. And in addition to that, if our bids come in much less than $5.5 million, the board might choose to issue a bond of less than that in order to meet the amount required to complete a project. And that would be for the given amount. Now recall, that bond is not only just for the field project, but also designed to help us ease our way into a 5-year capital campaign plan that we previously presented to you. So it includes both of those options. So the sequence allows us to identify the firm that will be our construction management firm, get them on board to help us review the bids that come in so that we can give you enough information in advance of the 25th so that when we ask for your final approval on the $5.5 million bond, you have a better idea of what the overall scope of that will be.
So I have a question for Jim or David or whoever, anyone that was there. Kathleen brought up a point about a conflict of interest with ZOP being the engineer and the project manager. Did they address that, or did that come up during the interviews, or was that addressed in their response?
Well, you have to understand, in the whole process, the whole construction process, ZOP Spector did the engineering of it. Okay, that's not actually doing the physical work of digging the ditches, installing pipe, etc. What ZOP Spector's scope of work was the design end, which Joe Nolan, the township, reviewed those plans, made sure all the numbers were right, everything was in order, and they did the plans. Their commitment is basically done with us as far as the plans. They did the plans are done, they've been submitted, we've gotten preliminary final on the plans. Now, the construction management portion of this is to manage to make sure that contractor A digs the ditches deep enough, make sure he's down to virgin soil, making sure he puts the proper amount of stone in, making sure that things are held to the specs of the design plans. So it's not so much a conflict of interest, but it would be in the best interest of ZOP to make sure the guy did them per the plans. That way, we're not coming back saying, hey, this field settled, has a big sag in the middle because you didn't put enough stone. It wasn't that it was designed wrong, but if the guy doesn't put enough stone in there, then we're going to have a bad field. So I would think the person that designed it, that has their stamp or their seal on the set of plans, is going to make sure the contractors follow their engineering plans to the letter. And that's what was approved by the township. That's how all their specs have worked. So a conflict, I would look at it as if there's contractor A was in there and ZOP owned part of that construction company. Now that's a conflict in that type situation. But when it comes to watching over contractor A, B, and C, making sure they do their job based on the specs, who would know the best? The one who actually made the specs, and they're going to make sure that they come out and they do them to the letter. And also, researching on the internet, and we all know what information you get on the internet, not all companies have up-to-date websites or have all the answers for all your questions. So, I think that's a bad litmus test on who's good versus who's bad. Also, look at the working relationship that Zop Spector has with the township already, with the township engineer, the manager, supervisors, also the code inspector, who's a real bear to deal with. And
I have a question for you, Jim. So if we award this to Zop, what do we do if Zop comes back to us one day and says we have to re-engineer something?
Well, why did it need re-engineered?
Well, I'm just saying, what if they do and come back, what if they come back to us and say, we found during the course of the construction that something needs to be re-engineered? So that would clearly be a conflict of interest. If we don't award it to Zop, we don't have to worry about that. That's my point.
There's a lot of what-ifs. I mean, it's with any of them.
But we can remove that one.
But, no, you can't remove a what-if. I mean, re-engineering, that's such a broad, I mean, as a particular item that I brought up, for instance, rock. If we hit rock when we decide to start digging some of these trenches, we never did a rock survey, geological study. It wasn't in our original bid for Architect to do that. But if you hit rock, and now you have to either blast rock, which would be very expensive, but that would be more on the contractor end. The contractor's going to suggest, hey, you might want to raise the height of the fields, and yeah, there's going to be engineering in it, but it's going to come down to dollars and cents, and it's going to be thrown back on our plate. Do you want to spend the money to blast rock or to redesign it? It's not, the rock didn't cause the conflict. There's no conflict there. And I don't know, the attorney the solicitor would like to chime in on what's a conflict or what's a...
Well, wait, since I said that, I'd like to speak. The way that I am looking at this is that the whole reason we want to go with a contract manager, a project manager rather, is to come out here and actually be the person to be our representative, to represent us in the face of these other companies that are out there doing this as their position. If we are bringing in somebody from the same company that we want supervised, that is not doing us any good. That is not going to be helping us in any way whatsoever. We already have a facilities manager who could be doing the exact same thing for us if that's the case and not spend $100 and whatever extra $1,000. So in my opinion, and I've been through this with construction at Woodland, I've watched it, we need a construction manager who will be vigilant about watching how the engineers put things in place and going back and forth with them and back and forth with us, as well as communicating somehow through our communications or our superintendent or how we're going to do it with the families in the district. This cannot be the same company coming out like big brother watching little brother do a project. How does that help us? It doesn't help us at all, and we're spending a lot of money to have pretty much them take care of each other and nobody take care of us.
Okay, well, hold on 1 second. Jim, hold on. To move this along, let me kind of summarize where we're at, and then I'll go down the line and ask each board member if they have any questions, and then we'll take a motion and discuss there. So it looks like Whiting Turner, essentially everyone agrees is out there, the most expensive, they scored the lowest. I'm looking at the scoring sheet that the committee used. It looks like Zop and Fidivia essentially scored about the same. Zop scored 230 versus Fidivia 237. So a couple of points, it's essentially the same. And they're essentially the same price. Zop's at $107,000 versus Fidivia at $105,000. So it's essentially practically a tie. And then you have the issue that Zop was the engineer, or not the issue, but the reality that Zop was the engineer from the beginning, and are a business that's in the local community versus Fidivia, who's in Lancaster. So let's just go down the line, since not all the board members have as much knowledge about this as everyone else. Go down the line, each ask any questions or make any comments, and then I'll look for a motion, and then we can try and push this along. Brenda?
Do we have the outline of a contract of what it is, the pieces that we want in, not the legal parts of it, but what does the contract consist of?
Yeah, typically, there's a standard contract. Stuart, I know you've shared this with me, we've reviewed it. Explain that, I appreciate it.
I guess the answer's two parts to answer of your question. The first is the RFP that we distributed out details very specifically what we're asking of the construction manager. That's everything from being on site having somebody on site every single day of the project, through through weekly updates to the board, to the administration, dealing with contractors, conflict resolution, change orders, all the things are included. The second part of the issue is the actual contract that we would have with whomever we would select. That is an agreement that's based on an AIA. AIA is the American Architect something or other. Yeah, thank you. And yes, that document, when we select our vendor whom we want to work with, we will enter an agreement with them that will detail that we're seeking from you all the services as detailed in the RFP as provided to you. All of these will be detailed under that agreement, and then the board would sign, and then they would sign as a contractor. So that would solidify everything that we're asking for, but they were made well aware of everything that we want from them relative to this project.
Have they said that they believe they could meet the time commitment that we have in mind? I mean, I thought we were talking about middle of August, that we could be able to begin practice on the fields in the middle of August, not in September.
Yeah, that's substantial. There's a term used in the construction industry called substantial completion,
Right.
and you're correct. It is middle of August, and then final completion with all punch lists is sometime in September.
Right, and the construction manager that we're talking about is in agreement with meeting that timeline, both of them.
That'll be the timeline that they'll be scrutinized under, and they're going to be responsible for putting the project schedule together, working with the architect, working with the administration to put that schedule together, and then not only in the agreement do we have things like weekly updates where our architect, our construction manager, and the administration, and any other of the subcontractors will meet, but on a daily basis, we plan, Stuart and I, or both of us together, will be meeting to find out where we're at, because, we have a short window of expectation to get this completed, and we need to pay diligence to this.
I guess I have a couple things. I guess the first one will be, can we send out another RFP? Can we request more information from somebody else that maybe not have a conflict of interest, or some of us may see as a conflict of interest?
The technical response to that is yes. I mean, certainly we could do that. However, we would need to give some, whatever the length of time that we would normally give for an RFP. Usually, I believe in this case it was 30 days. No, was it 30 days? Do you remember, Stuart? That's typically the time frame. And in doing so, we would again not meet the deadlines that we've set for ourselves. And one of the deadlines is simply to be with us on site as our construction management firm for the 21st to review the bids.
Well, I guess I go back to what Brenda just said. I know we approved the bond, we still did not approve the full scope of the project. And with that, I just sat in a foundation meeting where the information for the fundraising is very different than what we're saying right here at this table. So I guess what I think that we need to do is get our ducks in order. We don't have them there. The information is not the same across the board. It doesn't seem to be coming across. I still don't see why we can't have, we may have a construction manager that comes in and looks at our project and says, I cannot get this, nobody can possibly get this done within whatever amount, or says, hey, we can get it done in a month. We don't know, because we don't know what the project is yet. We haven't approved 1 field, 2 field, 10 fields. We haven't done it yet. And I think that's where I am just getting very frustrated with how our process is working. I think we need to do something about that in policy. And I want this to be done right. I do agree with you that I'd like to see us have a state-of-the-art, whatever it is that we need. However, We still need to do it correctly, and our procedure is not going that way. We're doing it out of order, out of sequence, and I think that's where we're going to trip ourselves up and get in trouble.
Okay. Where do I start? First of all, I wanted to know what having just gotten this information at 4:15 this afternoon, and I just literally sifting through some of the data now on my iPad, but I want to know what the relationship with Arcatera would be with these firms. I know we didn't consult Dave Horn on a project manager, and for whatever reasons, that's fine. I mean, but as I understand it, he has talked. He knows of our current companies, of the two, the one that we're talking about.
Yes, he is aware of the 4 companies that we asked to respond to the quote, response for a quote. Yes.
All right. And given that the case, then I really don't like any of them, quite frankly. To me, I think you need a project manager who's done fields. That's what we're building here. We're not building buildings, we're building fields. As simplistic as it may be, that's the way I look at it. To me, when those original 4 bids came in, the first thing I would have looked at is see how many fields have they built. Zobspector's guy built 1, the other guy none, but he's now working with a company that has done them in the past, has done several, as a matter of fact, and he's a new addition to that company. And it seems to me that that company would not bring this fellow on if he wasn't a good, just by looking from what I read on their website. The fellow Dan, and I don't know how you pronounce his last name, the owner of that company. It seems to me that they would not be bringing somebody on if he didn't have qualifications to do the job. But again, my questions is, this is not the owner of Fidevia. This is another engineer or another construction manager. So I don't know what to say about this. Really not content with any of them. If I had to go with one, I would leaning towards Fidevia, only by the fact that it seems like a stronger firm that's done more of this time of line of work, although he has not himself done this. And Jim even said that, laying down the turf is only 10%. It's all the substructure work that you have to do. And also, I think the most important thing here is keeping with our timeline. And if we do want these fields done by end of August, you almost have to appoint somebody tonight and to get it done. Otherwise, our timeline's backed up again another week, 30 days, and then the bids come in, and then you don't have your construction manager to go over the bids, and it's just a mess. And it seems like this whole project's been that way from the get-go. And I guess it's just something we have to live with, but it doesn't mean that we can't make the best decisions with the data that we have now. So with that said, I'm leaning towards Fidevia. By the only reason is because the owner seems to have built an incredible company. And I just hope that fellow's around if we run into problems with our current manager. And I don't like the fact that I have to make a decision tonight, but that's the way it is. I don't like the fact a lot of things that we have to do on this board, but this is one of the things that we have to deal with tonight. So Zobspector's work is done basically with us with regard to the engineering. I do not see future conflicts of interest. In fact, if you hire one firm to do a lot of your work, the project manager has a problem with the engineering, he goes right to the engineer that did the work, and they correct it, okay? So I don't have a problem with conflict of interest. I do not think there is a conflict of interest. Again, my only concern is the fact that none of the candidates have extensive experience building turf fields.
I personally don't have any questions right now. I didn't get a chance to see all the information, so I'm just going off of what I'm seeing now and hearing from other board members. I guess to touch on something that Kathleen and Herb said, I think the sequence issue, that's why we're trying to approve this tonight. The recommendation that the administration made is to approve this tonight so that they could be involved in reviewing the bids. And so I think this is in sequence. It's to make sure that we have the resource available to the administration and the other consultants so that they can help make the bid decisions. And then I think both of you made this point about not being happy with these folks. I think these are the folks that responded to the RFP. So, I mean, we could go out with another one. We'll eat up another month. But we had 4 respond, and one of the response was, we're not going to respond. So I just don't know if there is a perfect firm out there. So I guess that was just the point that I made. So in my mind, it's essentially a bit of a tie between the two of them, so I'm not really sure where I land at this point. Joyce?
Yeah, this really shouldn't be this huge of an issue. But I think, you put an RFP out, you get information back, you check their website, you interview them, you check their references, and then you make a decision. What I'm really struggling here is with the process. Herb mentioned that the most important thing here was to stay within our timeline, and that's been the answer for everything that we've had to do recently, and I'm really struggling with that. What is most important here is that we make the right decision for the kids and for the school district. And a point that Brenda made, we haven't, as a board, had a discussion on the project. We've heard recommendations. We've listened to many presentations. Some of them are saying different things than the other. So it is confusing, and I'm struggling with that as well. But I have had the opportunity to look at this and to spend some time on this, and I don't have a problem. Well, I do, but I would say that I would like the motion to read as follows, if there is a motion, that I would like to approve the contract.
Well, you can make one, so.
Oh, well,
don't do it yet,
I don't
but
want to now. I wanted to hear everybody else. But what it would be is that to approve the contract with Fidivia in the amount of $105,000 based on the current recommended scope for construction management services for the Methacton High School Athletic Field Complex, pending contract review by the solicitor and satisfactory responses received from contacted references.
So let's add,
So what I'm adding
Put
is-
aside the vendor for a second. Let's
Right.
just add, I can add that language to the motion, and
Right.
after we're all done, I'll reiterate it back to everybody, and then someone can insert whichever vendor they want in there, and then we can
Right.
vote on that. Okay.
One
Hold on, Joyce, do you have more, or are you done?
No, I'm good.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
thing I'd like to amend to the motion is that one-year time frame that they come back for the installation of the lights.
That being
That be included in their price.
Okay, is that something we can handle in just a contract, or is that something we?
Be within the contract, right?
I guess I don't have a frame of reference to say that ability to come back will be 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It would probably, the vendor would probably have to say they would be willing to come back if it doesn't extend beyond, within the 1 year, doesn't extend beyond 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever the amount of time is needed to. I don't know where we'll be in the project related to that. So, and I don't know how long it would take to put up the actual lights themselves. So if anyone knows that information, that's something we can talk with David Horn about. We can confirm that information with him, and therefore add that part to the language you're suggesting.
Well,
Didn't we just say that the price is all-inclusive?
Well, see, you got,
All-inclusive.
the whole thing here is, the firms all gave us a price based on time, from April to the end of August. One firm has said that they would come back and do whatever it takes. That's the local firm, 10 minutes down the road. The other firm said they would not, because they gave us a proposal based on a time frame from April until the end of August. So these are the things that you get with someone that's local, that knows the job. Once again, I'll say, ZOP's not doing the work. It's whoever that we award the bid to, they're doing the work. I don't understand how that can't be separated. The other thing is the buildings. We have block buildings to be built, we have electric conduit, we have PA systems, we have ADA issues with bathrooms. I mean, all this stuff, there's hundreds of components to this other than actual synthetic turf being laid on ground. And to sit there and say that, well, this one has more turf fields. Well, you know what? How many highways have they built? Well, highways, when you build a highway, you got to remove dirt, you got to put a sub-base down, then your base material. But the point here is that there are so many aspects to this being fixated on turf. It's not the way to go. And furthermore, Fidelia, they do one thing. They manage a construction job from start to finish. The other one does construction management, they do design work, they do engineering work, they do OSHA, they do DEP. I mean, it's a full-service company that we would have a lot of use for the same money. So.
Kim?
Sure.
Yeah, I guess after listening to everybody, I have some serious process problems. I think it's just not good public policy making or spending to have a certain limited portion of the board have information, the rest of us don't. Some of the board members who have analyzed it in short order, it seems, and I just think it's a bad precedent. There's no way you could convince the public this is a thoughtful decision without having any paperwork in front of me. I'd like to do my own analysis, frankly, and so I hear the issue about conflict of interest. I'm not sure I would dub it that, but certainly I would think if Mark and I worked in the same company and I had sort of an obligation to quality control the effort that went into something he designed, I think that there is an unusual, uncomfortable relationship there. So I mean, if there's a motion on the floor tonight, I may have to just say I'm going to recuse myself from voting because I don't feel I have enough information.
One thing on as far as the information, Friday we had the interviews. We had off on Monday. I received at this right around the same time Joyce and Herb as far as the resumes, and I got the score totals at the same time. And matter of fact, I had to come to the school to get them because my email's messed up. So it's the only difference is I got to ask questions. As far as the information, analyzing it, yeah, I had that on Friday. But as far as getting the information to the board, I mean, it got here as quick as it could. And far, like I said, the resumes, I saw the same amount of time. But
Well, if I could just respond to the process, because certainly, I can't argue for or against any of the other comments that were made, but regarding the process was pretty clear cut and dry, according to the administration. We had a proposal, we submitted the proposal, we received the responses, we then brought it to the property committee. I made a recommendation to the property committee that since we did not have enough information from the proposals, that we conduct interviews. The property committee chose to have the property committee chairman meet with the administration to conduct interviews for the 3 responded vendors. Again, this is all information that I provided in the beginning of this discussion. From that process, we had a scoring rubric. We completed the scoring rubric. I believe that President Nascimento mentioned the totals and the scores. We provided those scores to the chairman, and then there was belief that we needed additional information. I then was able to reach out to both ZOP and to Fadivia today, as requested, to get the resumes and also then to provide the information in regards to the evaluation rubrics to the members of the committee. So, I mean, I certainly I just want everyone to understand the process was a process that I felt was a fair process, and with the expectation that the committee, the property committee, would make the recommendation to the board as a part of hiring and making a recommendation to hire the construction management firm. If that's not in terms of a purpose for the committee, I should just be instructed to deal with it differently in the future, and I could certainly do that, because I certainly want to provide the board as a whole the process of moving forward with any type of things with this, a process that you're most comfortable with. But certainly, we believe that the process that we undertook in regards to the construction management made reasonable sense. It was a committee of the board that was provided the information as requested, and the recommendation is on the table. So I just want to clear that up. And if there's any other questions about the process, I'll be certainly glad to answer them.
Could I just ask one question? What would be the ramifications if we voted on this next week?
Basically, the only ramification of voting on this next week would be, first of all, we would not be able to have the person on board to help us review, and then we would need to reschedule the review process into the future with David Horn, in hopes that we can have enough time in order to get the firm on board to be up to par with us. So I don't know if he's available within the week, if he's available within 2 weeks. I just don't know his availability. But I can say that I'm sure, with the work that David's done with this, he can make himself available. And certainly, I just don't, I mean, if we give the board another week to make a decision, I would only want to do that if the board was giving me direction in order to gather some additional information that you think is necessary as part of this process.
Well,
Because if there's no additional information.
Let's let Mark get his, and I have it.
It's more questions than thought. I have no building experience, so I'm deferring to what other people would recommend who do have experience. So I looked at the committee, I guess, for starters. So I guess my first question is, how many people are on the committee?
The property committee is 3.
Yeah, property. 3. And is there a formal recommendation coming from the property
Well, I think
committee?
the issue, and I think maybe this is where the breakdown of the process is that the property committee didn't have the chance to meet. So Jim, as the chairman, is making a recommendation because he was involved in the interview process, but he hasn't had a chance to bring the committee of the board together to review. And it sounds like based on the information they've received and looked at today, that they're split.
Right. Well, from my perspective, I think there ought to be a formal recommendation that comes from the committee. And I have no information in front of me whatsoever, and I'm not an expert in this field whatsoever. So I'm not comfortable with moving ahead. So I know there's a process here, but the process as it's working is not correct. It's not proper, and it's not...
Well, there's a breakdown in the process.
Right. It hasn't worked, so it needs to be modified. So I think we ought to push the vote off maybe to next week. We need to do something to get more information. At a minimum, I'd like to see the results of what were put together, because I have nothing. I have zero.
So we have 2 options. One is that someone can make a motion, right? I think there's 2 options, really. There's one is the motion as listed in the agenda with I think the good changes or the good additions that Joyce had recommended about the recommended scope and pending satisfactory approval of the project as determined by the board. Or someone can make a motion to table this until next week with everyone having clear knowledge that that person then either would not be able to participate in the bid review process, or that process would have to be moved out.
Why don't we push this to next Tuesday? Why don't we also have both firms come in and give a presentation to the full board? That way, any questions, they could directly ask it. Also, Frank, I imagine, will be back, and he can also talk about if there's any legal end of it, being that we see Frank most of the time. And that would give people time to come up with their thoughts, questions, comments, and they can directly go to the horse and they have the same information as each other at the same time.
Kathleen, you were going to?
Yes, I was going to ask one question. You said that you gave the rankings. I must have missed that. Can you tell me what the rankings were in order of whoever scored the highest?
So you take Whiting Turner out because they came in last on both.
Because they came in, right.
But ZOP was scored at 230 and Fidivia was scored at 237.
So Fidivia came in first.
Fidivia came in first
then the other
from the ranking, and ZOP is about $107,000 and Fidivia is about $105,000. So $2,000 difference benefiting Fidivia, 7 point out of 230 benefiting ZOP.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Fidivia. So.
Can I ask a clarification here? The reason that it was put on the agenda as a placeholder was potentially because we wouldn't have received information back from somebody, or what was the placeholder status based on?
Just because you left it open to see to get the recommendation from the property committee and then who the board wanted to go to. So, okay, so, yeah. Brenda.
So the suggestion was made about making presentations next time, but I actually think that if we got a recommendation from the property committee, we, the whole board, I'm not sure that we need to be instead of the property committee, because the committee itself spends its time working on property issues. And I would defer to them on that subject. The one thing that I would want to see would be a written list of exactly what the contract would consist of once the recommendation comes from the committee. I would be okay with that.
So it sounds like there's a consensus to take this vote up next week. It sounds like there's consensus to have the information that was provided and the scoring and whatnot sent around to all the board members, and that we ask the property committee to meet in the next week so that you come into the 25th meeting with a recommendation. So I think everybody's nodding. So can the property committee meet within the next 5 or 6 days to hash this through?
Yeah.
Sure can try.
Yeah. Okay, even if someone has to dial in or call in. Yeah. Okay, so then we need to give the administration some direction on whether to, so right now the bid review meeting is scheduled for the 21st?
Yes.
So we need to give the administration direction on whether to have that and come back to us on the 25th as planned to tell us whether the costing is in line with the $5.5 million bond that we had planned for or approved, or if we want to push that out.
Well, if I may, the bid review meeting needs to occur on the 21st so that we can provide, with or without the contract manager.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
I mean, that's
what
I would recommend, but I'm just saying we have to
it.
give you some direction on that.
Well, yeah, we're going to have it without the contract management because it'll be next week till we hold the property committee meeting, and it won't be till the 25th, after the 21st, that we actually have this vote.
So I want to make sure everyone's clear on that and okay with that? Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask one more quick thing of the property committee? And I don't know if it was discussed or if you need to check into it, but is there a way you can ask this, how they're going to ensure safety of the students and staff while this construction is going on? If that's just something that you can find out from them.
It was discussed that as far as the district given badges, and also the construction management company is also responsible for making sure the contractors get their background checks done. And Mr. Harney could probably explain that more. That was one of his key questions, so maybe you can shed some light on that.
I just asked all of the firms that were involved at what the process they were going to use to make sure that we had all 3 of the clearances that we mandate for anybody that walks on our property. And they assured me that they will have a process. They're going to come through us to get badges. They'll have a badge presented by us, so we will have access to those, the 3 different clearances, the state, the FBI, and the child abuse. So we'll guarantee that those are all done for everybody that walks on the property.
Did you happen to ask anything about how they're going to ensure safety while they're moving big items of construction pieces around, the big, vehicles, things like that, about the students and their, walking around, staff walking around, cars moving, that kind of thing?
There's got to be some kind of standard.
Yeah, I think Stuart has a response for that for us.
Yeah, I know, and again, talking with Dave Horn as we were going through the process, obviously, one of the major components is securing areas as they're being worked on. And that's, everything from factoring in, certain events where they're working on certain parts of the property, fly balls going into certain construction sites. I mean, that to safety of the students when the construction is going on. All of the areas will be obviously secured, labeled appropriately as construction is going on. There's two major phases to the project. So that's obviously one of the biggest parts of it, is securing each one of the sites that's being worked on during both phases of this project to ensure that, barring somebody intentionally going into a certain area, that the overall construction site would be secured to the best of the ability during that 5 months.
Okay. Well, that was relatively painful.
Just one thing as far as the committee meeting, as far as Herb and Joyce, 7:30 in the morning, any particular day available?
You guys can do that offline.
Well,
Let's get
the one
the
thing I
agenda.
want to do is I want to invite Fidavia and Zop Spector to present it to the full committee.
Okay.
And then also if any other board members in the public want to come out, that they can to that meeting.
Well, not any. We have to advertise it, and we can't all show up, but you guys can figure that off. Let's just push it
All
on
right,
the agenda.
we'll let everybody know.
Okay. All right, moving on, item number 7, voting items for next week. Dr. Zerbe.
We'll have 7.1, the board meeting minutes, the special meeting of January 7, 2014, the work session of January, and combined meeting on January 28, 2014, list of bills, and the treasurer's report. We'll be talking about, if we flip over on the agenda, the auditing services for Major Mastro LLC in the amount of $18,000 for the fiscal year June 30, 2014, 15, and 16. And I just want to let the board also know that we have on the agenda for a voting item the transition of payroll personnel software applications to CSIU from Pentimation as of April 1, 2014, and financial bidding software applications as of July 1, 2014, with keeping that transition as recommended by one of the members of the public at our Finance Committee meeting. We'll be keeping that software until August so that we can confirm all the transition takes place. Mr. Whiteleather, do you have any other comments related to that and or any rehash of the discussion with the Finance Committee meeting on that particular item?
Just real quickly, we had two outside vendors as well as our current in-house reviewed during this process. Representation was made from all departments affected by the transition. During this, the readily apparent item was our current incumbent was not providing us with services and financials to an equal level as the other two providers were demonstrating to the school district. The final issue, after all that comparison was done, roughly the two vendors proved equal from the committee that we used a grading rubric for. The final issue was relative to financial impact of dollars and cents that attributed to the transition of software as well as ongoing payment for their services. The one system was yearly basis was $25,000, but transition was well over $100,000, converting the data, training, etc. The software vendor that you have before tonight and for approval next week, CSIU, their yearly costs were about the same, $24,000 to $25,000 a year, but transitional cost was about $10,000. So about 1/10 the cost of the other provider. Utilizing that full scope, the recommendation was to Finance Committee last week was that CSIU was the vendor we were going to move forward, are recommending to move forward with the request to the full board at February 25th to allow us to move forward to solidify moving everything forward. as dates listed on here for transition.
Are there any questions related to the transition of payroll and personnel software?
None of us get a raise.
Generally, here's a summation of this whole process. We believe that by doing this, we'll not only save money on our reoccurring software costs, but we'll also improve efficiency with some of the automation that they have in their software already that we plan on taking advantage of, and that Mr. Harney and Mr. Whiteleather, for the little over a year, have been contemplating on how to deal with. So we believe that it's a win-win for the school district and its employees and the taxpayers.
Can I make one comment? And I didn't make it during the finance, and I should have. CSIU, a lot of people may not be aware, I mean, they're an educational organization, and what came out during the whole process was they understood what we do in our business, and Penimation is used across other businesses, and this is really something that was designed by an educational group. So what we saw that came through was they got what we do, and we found it very beneficial that just several little things that they did were very much tweaked for the educational environment. So I just wanted to put that in there, that CSIU is an educational outfit.
Any other questions? Item number 5, confidential and mail benefit co-premium adjustments to MEA contributions effective July 1, 2013. This is due to the pending changes in the Bucks-Amonco plan offerings. Any discussions on this particular item? I believe that we had it on the item for a discussion at the January 28th meeting, but due to the length of term of that particular meeting, I imagine that there was very little discussion on that, and I think I moved rather quickly through that process and said we could certainly revisit it again. So I certainly want to put that on the floor. Essentially, what we're asking for your approval on is to align the administrative group and the confidentials with the same co-premium benefits that the other contracted groups are eligible for starting July 1, 2013. I think I also said on the 28th that cost will be approximately $15,000, of which we are, as a part of changing to the Bucks-Montgomery program for prescription services, will be saving in a little more in excess of $30,000, whereby we can offset that $15,000 cost in that. This is, and just so everyone is clear, this is a recommendation to do it in advance of the requirement as of July 1, 2014. So what that means is the recommendation is not required as of July 1, 2013, but it will be required based on the language in their contracts and in the fact that we changed healthcare providers. So we will be forced to make the change no matter what. We're asking that as of July 1, 2013, you put all of our groups on the same path with healthcare co-premium. Any questions? No questions? Number 6, a resolution. This is authorizing the issuance of the school district general obligation note, series 2014, principal amount of $5.5 million for the purpose of funding various capital projects, including the school athletic facilities. Any questions related to item number 6? Okay. We have some personnel items. Mr. Harney, would you mind going over those items for us, please?
Sure. We've got 2 employment personnel for your approval next week. There will be additions to this. You came across my desk today. Transportation is always a fluid business, and you'll see that every month, so there will be some additions next week. We have 2 personnel change of status for your approval next week, and that's all we have listed at this point.
Thank you. And then on item, we're going to skip down to policy 712 for the first reading. If you recall, at at the, I believe it was a January 28th meeting, the board approved the PSBA policy on governance. That policy, and thanks to our policy chairman, committee chairman, Ms. Hackett, she recognized that the PSBA recommendation policy that we approved conflicted with our policy 011. Therefore, we've made those changes. They're posted to the website in red, and those are on for the first reading this evening, just so that our internal policy is congruent with that of PSBA. Are there any questions related to that? And then item 713, we're going to ask for the approval next Tuesday on the following policies as listed. I do want to bring to your attention that several of the policies had additional comments made to them, and they came not only from the board here but also from the policy committee. The first one, there was a board statement related to records management. That's policy number 800. It's number 5 on your list. Records management, specifically the change was related to email retention. Email retention previously in our policy was for 30 days. We are making a recommendation that the policy be extended for 2 years, and therefore all email that are older than 2 years would expire and be deleted from the email system. I believe there was a discussion by the board, or at least by one member, about being able to either have those emails available for the length of their term and or for maybe in perpetuity or some other fashion thereof. We've done a little bit of research on that, and we recognize that by contacting PSBA, we wanted to look at what their practice or their recommendations are. They came back and said that they currently do not have a position on the length of time. However, they referred me to other school district policies throughout the Commonwealth. And so after working with our Director of Technology, we looked at a source by Symantec. Symantec is a global authority in many things technology, one of them being email archiving. And part of their recommendation, and it's certainly not a hard and fast rule, but as part of their document on how long emails should be saved, and I'm quoting it from a document copyrighted in 2007, said most email messages can be classified as general business correspondence with a suggested default retention period of 3 to 5 years. So we are recommending 2 years. That year was also reviewed by our solicitor, and that the firm recommended that based on their experience with the district and their right to know request as part of any other litigation that has produced any e-discovery holds on our email. So with that said, the policy as it's posted for second reading still is worded for 2 years. Now, I just want to know if the board cares to discuss that any further, or if actually our policy chairman has any additional comments on that.
No, I thought we went through the reasonable methods that we could and found that nobody really is recommending anything more than 2 years, so we felt that that was a good approach to take.
Any other comments or questions from the board?
Yeah, I just have a question. Just help me understand what this means. Does that mean that there is an effort by technology, perhaps, that if something in my email is 2 years old, that they go in and it evaporates? Is that what that means, or?
That's exactly what that means. That means that the time limit as of the calendar date of February 18th, anything that goes beyond 12:01 midnight following the start of the 2-year period would expire and be deleted from from our email system. To give you an idea of what that means, and I'll be as general as I possibly can, they're basically, email is set up in many different ways, but for our district and for many school districts across the Commonwealth, using a system called Microsoft Exchange, you would generally have 2 instances of every message that's included in your system. For the purpose of our dialogue tonight, I'm going to tell you that each of us have what's called a mailbox. The mailbox is your individual mailbox that receives messages sent to you, and it has a record of messages that you send out. In addition to that, we also have an archival mailbox, a mailbox that sits there on the system and captures any email going out and any email coming in. And so what this retention policy would basically do is, based on the time limit that you approve within the policy, is delete the message from your mailbox and from the archive mailbox, so that no longer on the Methacton School District system shall we have a record of that particular message being sent or received.
So then, is it fair to say that if I think that I want to retain something beyond 2 years, am I legit in sending it to my personal email so it doesn't evaporate if I feel like I need to retain it?
From a legal perspective, it would be not advisable to send it to your personal email. There may be other methods that the administration could certainly discuss of how to store particular messages that may be in the interest of the district to keep beyond 2 years. One method, obviously old-fashioned, would be to print those messages and store them in some physical location within the district. The district may also have other electronic storage mechanisms available where messages could be kept somewhere other than an email archive.
Okay. Not exactly the response I was looking for, but close. And my only... The problem is a record's a record. It doesn't matter if it's electronic or on paper. So the administration is not making any recommendation that you store or send or print or do anything other than retrieve and send emails from the system that it so provides to the board and to its employees.
If I could just make a couple comments, because we've dealt with this in my company. There is no right answer to what is appropriate. I think people come to their own agreement of what it is. 2 years seems about right to me, maybe a little longer, maybe I doubt any shorter, but 2 years to me personally is probably okay. Most of the issues in terms of keeping it longer revolve around, at least from my experience, are legal discovery issues, which means you have to produce that. And if people know that you forwarded out, now your account potentially is subject to discovery, that they could actually pull those records in if it's known that you sent forwarded records out. So I personally wouldn't advise you to do that either. So I think 2 years is fine, in my opinion. No right answer.
The only comment I was going to make is that records that don't exist, obviously, are not required to be turned over. So if it's the district's policy of deleting emails after 2 years or any other sort of record, there would be no legal obligation to provide those records, because in legality they don't exist anymore.
Good, Frank.
Are there any other questions on that item? I want to make sure that we confirm that up. If there's any other comments, we certainly will take them at the board meeting on Tuesday. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention. If there's no other comments on that one, I want to tell you, turn your attention to policy number 815.1, social media. It was recommended by one of our board members that we have specific reference to our cyberbullying and bullying policy. That was made, so that change was made into the policy. and that is on page 5 of 7 of that policy. I will tell you that it's, for some reason, it didn't come out red in the change, but it is listed there, and so I do apologize. We'll make that correction for the official meeting, but it's not. But it's on the top of page 5 of 7 of that particular policy. And I don't believe there's any other major changes unless Chairman thinks otherwise.
No, we had a request for a process policy, and we will consider that at our next policy committee meeting.
Okay. That's it? Okay, moving on to number 8, non-voting items for discussion. Back to you, Dr. Zerbe.
Yep, if it's okay, I want to say that I already spoke about the school calendar in the detail that I wanted to provide, so I will move on unless there's any additional questions on the school calendar. With no other questions, I'm moving on to graduation. I want you to, again, be aware that the administration is working to secure an off-site location for the holding of our 2013-14 high school graduation. We have looked at many of the area universities and are still in the process of trying to finalize a location, as well as you're aware, a date in this process. So I do not have any firm information for you on graduation at this point. However, we did meet with the Home and School Association for the high school, and they were relatively pleased with the fact that we were looking at the types of off-site locations for graduation, like the college and universities in the area. So they were pleased with that recommendation. Yes.
Do you have, can you tell us the list of places that aren't going to work?
Yeah, I do have a list of places that aren't going to work. Our first recommendation was to look at a neighbor to us, Ursinus College, and they were very accommodating in providing us the facilities. However, the capacity issue surfaced. We're looking at upwards of 3,000 attendees, including graduates, parents, and whatnot. They have the capacity of taking care of about 1,700. So we, without having an extensive tent arrangement like they would do on normal graduation, that seems not a likely place to hold the site. We have contacted Villanova University. Villanova is a site that many non-public and private schools, as well as high schools in our area, utilize as a location for graduation. They have a system in place. On some days actually go through 3 graduations for 3 different school districts or school entities on one given day. So they have a process. So they take care of security and all sorts of things. Their only available date is June 5th, which I would tell you right now, that'll be a stretch for us to get back to. So that is currently out. We reached out to Montgomery County Community College. They were very accommodating in getting back to us with some information. And it seems to be typical with all the places we reached out to. They want to help us out. They recognize the value of a relationship in doing this, especially being our neighbors. But they too lack the facilities to house a graduation of our size. We are currently getting information from the Oaks Convention Center. We know that the dates that we are currently looking at with regarding to our current schedule would work. There's other particulars that we're currently working on. Again, that is not an institution of higher learning and presents other challenges, but it is a location that certainly we're aware they can hold us capacity-wise. So as we get more information, and hopefully I'll have that for you by next Tuesday, that's kind of where we're at in the process. There are 2 other universities, I prefer not to name them at this point in time, that we're also in discussions with. I just don't want to put them in a position at this point. Any other questions related to that item? 8.3, on Monday, February 10th, I met with representatives from all the home and school associations to discuss our future direction of the home and school, as it once was called, a home and school council, meaning an overall governing body, and how that governing body might work with the existing home and school associations, meaning an association in each building. We had a lot of discussion. I presented not only the information that I was available, or I had available, but also we allowed members from the group to voice their opinion, either for or against moving forward with moving away from a home and school association structure to a PTA structure, which is one that is really an out-of-the-box program that can get us up and running in a new structure and have us moving forward in no time. I presented the pros and cons to that consideration, and it was then decided that on an 8-0 vote that the administration should step forward and help the home and schools formalize their 501c3 structure and put all the pieces in place that I had previously mentioned at a board meeting probably in December regarding not only putting together and addressing things like insurance, training, and conflict resolution, but 3 other areas as well. So I am moving forward with that, working with our solicitor and their firm to get the 501c3 status moving. I know that Ms. Hackett was at that meeting as well. I don't know, Brenda, if you wanted to comment on that process.
Well, I was pleased with the way the process went. I felt that the people felt they were a significant part of the process, and I thought that was very important for them to do. Since that time, we've also had another meeting trying to get some ideas together.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions on 8.3 home and school? Lastly, 8.4 fundraising consultants for the field project. As part of our presentation on January 28th, I recommended to the board that we move forward with getting a consultant to help us with the fundraising efforts of the district for the athletic field project. I created a one-page request for proposal. Those proposals are due back on the 19th. I plan to meet with our board president, and we're going to review those proposals and then make a recommendation to the board and give you updated information as to what those proposals include, as well as what a recommendation for a consultant may be in that process. I'm hoping that we can move forward with that in a relatively reasonable time frame. Certainly, the things that I'm thinking about when we're talking about putting a consultant in place, it would be beneficial for the district to have a consultant in place to help us plan activities so that activities can occur around the time where significant construction events are currently planned. So, for example, significant construction events are planned early April, meaning April 1, to break ground. A good fundraising effort should be on board and at least have a preliminary plan in place to take advantage of those significant time frames and those significant events. So the major purpose of the consultant is really to come in to help us plan and to help drive a schedule to meet the goals. So are there any questions related to the fundraising consultant for the field project?
Yes. The consultant's not going to help us raise any money?
The consultant is going to help put together our plan and help us organize our volunteers to help raise the money.
So they're not helping us identify sources to go to? They're not helping us put together a plan of how much we should be raising, what our potential is, none of that?
Well, typically, to do I'm trying to think what it's called, an assessment of our ability would cost us a significant amount of money up front. That's typically, we're probably talking about $50,000 or more, based on conversations that I've had with some of the vendors. I believe that as part of my recommendation, in regards to putting the fundraising efforts in the hands of the district, we were looking at a range between $500,000 to $1 million. Now, certainly, we need to set a firm target, not something so wide, but certainly set a firm target, and they can certainly use some information that we can provide them in order to set that. But to actually do a typical survey where they survey contributors and do a lot of interviews, that type of work typically takes some time, and it also costs us a lot of money. And it's money that certainly won't be used to pay for any of the field renovations. So no, the current proposal is to put the planning in place and help us to direct and mobilize our volunteers as part of the process. And I think those volunteers will be all the way across the board, as I mentioned before, from our sports organizations to our home and school organizations, and many of the people that have been avid volunteers for our district over the time. So again, it's a process that will include everyone in the part of the giving piece.
Okay, I guess I just misunderstood. I thought we were getting a fundraising consultant to help us fundraise. I thought that usually when they do the cost is usually a percentage off the top. It's not really a cost to pay somebody. They may say that amount, but that money comes off what they raise, which is usually significantly more than lay people can raise. And I guess that's when I had been pushing for that I guess I didn't think that they were just going to help us organize events. I kind of think I think $500,000 is, I think it's small. I think we could do a lot better, but I guess we'll wait and see what they come back with.
Any other comments or questions related to that item?
Okay, moving on, item 9, other new business. Anyone have anything for new business? I'll bring one thing up. It's Dr. Zerbe has discussed before a special meeting, calling a special meeting around the Fields project. So he and I discussed this yesterday, and what we're envisioning is that once the bids are back, the bid review process will happen. The administration will come to the board and validate the cost versus the planned $5.5 million bond. And then from there, in early March, we'll call a special meeting of the board where we'll review all of the components of the bids. The administration will make their recommendation again, whether it's changed or whether it remains the same. They'll make that recommendation, and that will be the opportunity for the board and the public to really dive into what the Fields project's going to be, and for us to, basically for each board member to give their input, and for us to make a final vote on what the project's going to look like. So that's kind of the thought process as it stands now. We're moving forward with finalizing the scope of the fields and the turf fields and light project.
So when you say early March, there's not a date yet?
There are two. Go ahead.
I'm recommending that the board members reserve 2 dates: March 4th, that's a Tuesday, and March 11th, that's the second Tuesday of the month. And once we know where we stand after the 21st, I'll be able to communicate with the board and then to advertise for the special meeting.
I understand the bids are due tomorrow, is that correct?
21st, Friday.
No, the bids themselves.
The bids are due on the 19th, yes.
Have we seen any so far?
I don't know. I don't know that. Are they going to us, or are they going, no? Are they going to Dave?
No, we have not seen any bidders at this point.
Okay.
What does that do? Does that mean there's likely that we don't get any?
I mean, it certainly could happen, but I don't think that's the indication at this point in time. Usually, I mean, this is typical. Usually, we would see them at the last possible moment.
They never what?
They come like that.
They're always 10, half hour, 10 minutes.
So
Okay.
they call,
9 p.m. on the 18th is an early bid, okay.
if they call and say, can I get it to you tomorrow, that's a no.
That is correct. There's a deadline, and that's the deadline that they need to stick to.
And we're reviewing them on the 21st, is that date correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, the administration and David Horn will be reviewing them so we know exactly where we stand.
Okay, great, thanks.
Not to beat a dead horse, but have we heard anyone say, yes, I'm going to respond, or have we just been radio silent? I mean, I don't get nervous about these things, but I'm a little nervous about this now.
No, good questions. Certainly, there's been dialogue, not necessarily from contractors to the district, but it's our understanding that there are indications through questions from vendors. Typically, when you see questions, which there have been some, and then not us, but David Horn responds as a memorandum to all the prospective bidders. And so when you see questions coming in, there's a good chance that, they're making questions because they're preparing their response. So we believe that there will be responses.
Fingers crossed.
Do we have a date for conditions of use?
Well, at this point, we're not aware of any new dates set. We know that as of the last conditional use hearing, they did not set any dates moving forward, and that they would have to come back to all three parties, the township and two parties in the disagreement, to set that date.
I don't think you'll see one until April sometime.
Okay. Any other new business? Okay, courtesy of the floor. Andy?
Candy Agaville, I know you were discussing graduation and you weren't really visiting the idea of your sinus, but can I make a suggestion as a parent who had a child go to a graduation at your sinus in 2003? It was absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, we did discuss it, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, well,
it won't work.
I'm thinking right now you may want to, but I mean, from my experience, it really was. I mean, that's the only child I didn't get to see graduate. My children's grandmother was there. She was knocked over by the other parents. The graduates couldn't get into the gymnasium because the parents the parking was big. I mean, the college is beautiful. If we had a small school, it would work, but from my experience, I would take that right off the table.
Yeah, it already is off the table. That was Dr. Zerbe's comment.
But I thought maybe you start running out of options, you might start looking in that direction. Plus, it was June and it wasn't hot outside, but it was, I mean, people were starting to get faint. It really was bad in there. But just wanted to lay that out there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Andrews?
John Andrews, Lower Providence. With regard to the construction manager bidding, one of the bidders, one of the four, did not bid. And I wonder, perhaps, is it possible that they did not bid because they felt that the project was undoable in the time period? So why get involved in something that they viewed as impossible, rightly or wrongly?
Yeah, please.
In response to that, they specifically said that they did not have any staff.
Okay, all right.
For this project.
All right, and you had said that before, and I missed it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. With regard to the loan that you're contemplating authorizing next week, the $5.5 million, detailed in the resolution, as was discussed here, is that with the exception of $5,000 a year, that would be paid off in the years of 2025, 2026, and 2027. And all of those dates are after the date when we would have to do the first turf replacement. I have a fundamental problem that we'll be paying for the second set of turf before we've paid for the first set of turf. It's somehow we've, and maybe someone makes a strong case that, well, every loan gets paid off at the end of where the other loans are paid off. But, one solution to that is that if the fundraising were to have a goal and succeed at, let's say, something in the $1 to $3 million range, I think that would answer the concern that you're not, because that money could be applied to pay off some of the debt well before you need new money for the new turf out in, let's say, 2024 or earlier.
John,
with regard to the bid opening tomorrow, is that open to the public? Typically, those bid openings are open to the bidders and the public.
Yeah, that's typically open to the public.
Yes, thank you.
I believe is it going to be here, in this room? Do you know what time?
2 o'clock.
It's probably 2 o'clock here,
Yes,
I imagine.
yes, thank you. And, all right.
Thank you. Any other courtesy of the floor? Okay, if there's no other business, can I have a motion for adjournment? Kathleen, second. Kim, all those in favor? We opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you.